What is the role of blame, shame, and guilt? And where does it undermine your capacity for health? And where does it keep you stuck? That's what we're going to discuss today. I'm excited to bring this topic because there's so much depth in it and so much breadth that it comes up over and over again on a continual basis with our patient interactions. Enjoy. Welcome to Frankly Speaking with Dr. Wade. This show was created for and inspired by the thousands of patients I've served, so it's time for me to speak up and speak out on their behalf. With a wide range of experts, we bring you weekly insights, diving deep into topics of controversy to bust through the sugar coating that keeps you and your family stuck in the mainstream. You know, when blame comes up, it comes up for me, it shows up where I look outside of me. I look outside of me for something else. Don't think that blame can't be blaming yourself as equally as destructive, because it is. But when we look at a scenario in our life, for example, something happens or an episode, or you feel like there's a setback, and it could be whether it's job related, whether it's with a spouse or relationship, whether it's a lost love, something like that. And we look at it and we look for something outside of ourselves. That's really where this starts to come from. And it has to do with some previous beliefs and judgments that are attached to that as well, like shame and guilt. And in many cases through, our spirituality, which actually it's very separate than religion, but religious beliefs often will tag with variation different shaming strategies onto our behavior. And it also helps kind of guide the direction of our behavior as a checkpoint, and how well something is cited, whether it's, being the strict behavior in accordance with the Bible, or whether it be this deviation from interpretation of that same story, but with some flexibility and some rule bending. And so that's not what this talk is about. That's not where my opinion is going to hang out. What I'm bringing up to you is the concept of where we blame, where we then have shame, and then where we have guilt. And these three are really interconnected. So if we're going to blame something on somebody else, then we're going to project that person or that situation or that outside party or the environment had the bearing on the episode. It literally starts to draw a line in separation. So it disconnects you, it disconnects me from the experience, when really we can't separate that. So how I've noticed it, just as an example, in my own life, is when I blame the environment for something. Like, this is the situation we're in because of our president. That's a blame game. That's one example of it. And this is not a political conversation. Right now, this is about where you're using blame to distract from yourself and to stop you from seeing where your role in this process is. This is about being accountable, and this is about growth. So some of the things we talk about are going to be this uncomfortable conversation, this crucial conversation, which many of these are. That's what I like to talk about, is crucial conversations. And yes, I've read the book. It's a great book, and years ago, and that's part of our regime when I'm training a successor and an associate, is that they understand what a crucial conversation is and start to learn and develop that skill set. Well, for this benefit, you can gain by understanding your level of blame and your level of separation and disconnectedness as to your role in this process. So how do you correct a situation? For one, you have to be accountable. You have to acknowledge that you are experiencing this, so you are part of co-creating it. You are part of this experience, and you have an opportunity to grow through it. You have an opportunity to experience something different each time a pattern comes up in your life. In fact, it's arguable, but yes, patterns will continue to repeat until, if you've noticed, until you start to see and change that behavior. So for me, the acknowledgement was, I'm not in this situation just because of our president, or I'm not in this health situation just because our healthcare system is not delivering on its promise, is taking us down an incredibly destructive path. is a great thing in crisis care, but not a great thing for well care or health care. Again, all different topics for different days. But once I start to take my own ownership in this process and I own my role, my participation, my significance in it, without over-grandizing it, without becoming overly responsible and too responsible for others, it's called appropriate levels of responsibility and accountability. And my accountability in the situation is not to blame someone else or myself. Key distinction. It's not just blaming something outside. It's actually having the vibration, the wherewithal to blame anything. And blaming anything is another layer deep than just blaming something outside, but blaming anything as to the cause of it versus accepting responsibility and accountability in what is now what. That is an empowering position. Anytime I have a blame towards someone else or myself, I have now taken myself out of accountability and into victimization. I am now the victim, and this is done to me either by myself or someone else's belief on myself, or some self-destructive behavior, whether it be self-confidence, poor self-view, or self-esteem, that doesn't allow me to see myself as bigger than that piece, and not bigger than something or someone else, but bigger than that. Okay? So that being the issue. So if for some reason I have loss in my life, whether it be my parents, one at a time, a family breakdown between siblings, or I lose a mentor and one of my best friends, there's cumulative effects in there that was really carrying this undertone of blame, and I didn't realize it because, well, I'm not a victim. Well, I'm not a victim, and yet there was some portion of victimization in there, in victimhood, because there was still some blame. There was still something happening, and honestly, it wasn't something, if you asked me, I would say I'm blaming anybody or anything, but yet there was this, I can know that intellectually, but my body wasn't buying in. My body was feeling somehow betrayed. Somehow I didn't completely buy in on a cellular level. I didn't own it. I was still questioning. I was still wondering. I was still unsure. I was still really, how could you take these people away from me? How is this right? How is this a loving God, so to speak, right? So we're challenged by our belief set, and that's only when I got conscious of what it was carrying in my body and what it was leading and what it was manifesting. But again, you have to pay attention to what is it manifesting and how. Then I could look at it and say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this was accumulating below the surface, building up like stalagmites in a cave from the ground up, right? Building up, drip, drip, drip over time, that was creating this undertone and really undermining anything in my own power to make changes in my life and continue to grow. Now, I've grown in a lot of other ways with it, but this is something, anytime this is holding us back as a link, this link, again, you've heard the saying, cliche, you're only as strong as your weakest link. This can be that small, subtle link that's below the surface, preventing you from getting that next level or preventing you from breaking through and growing through something and stopping this madness loop of, events that happen and reoccur in your life over and over and over. And you think, oh my gosh, really? Haven't I got past this? This keeps happening. It could be that you attract a certain type of person into your life. It could be that you continue to have the same challenges at work or in a relationship or financially or with your automobile, as in, what you see as possible and where you're feeling a blame, which then adds to shame, which then adds to guilt. And so the secondary pieces of shame and guilt follow, and shame and guilt can also lead. It's just that we have to think outside of ourselves and that we are less than or we're a victim somehow, some level there, which brings in these things into play, because either way, they're going to find connection and they build a story. And then they have consequences for behavior. And there is a judgment as a result of that, which then keeps this thing moving in this big loop. As we start to address, you don't have to break everything down so complex. Here's how you can start to get to the root of this, and here's how you can start to solve this problem day to day. If you just ask yourself, where am I blaming something? Take anything in your life that's not going great or that hasn't, or something that was a setback for you. It could be financially. It could be maybe a missed opportunity. It could be something with your health. Like, oh my gosh, I found out I have an autoimmune disorder called Hashimoto's. Or, oh my gosh, I am possibly celiac and I'm allergic to gluten, or I have Crohn's, or I have IBS, or something like that, right? Or you just realize that you have high blood pressure and you've had it for years, and medically they're putting you on a drug for it. That said, how do you take that responsibility? What is your role in this whole process? Do you have a role? Are you willing to accept the role? Victimhood is, I'm just a victim of the circumstance, so I have to take this drug. That's an option. Option B, I'm part of this. I helped co-create this. How can I work with it? Or how can I change it? Or how can I be empowered by this? How can this help me right now redirect and set a new course or refocus on my health so I feel back empowered? I feel empowered with my health. And dare I say in control, I mean in charge, meaning actions and behaviors are moving towards your being in charge versus taking control as though you can actually control everything, because you can't. Let's say there's some damage and destruction done already to the body or to the relationship. So now what? What do? If it is as is, accept reality for what it is, if it's reality. It could just be your reality, but either way, if it's your reality, that is your reality. So the question is, how am I seeing this? Am I seeing this as a victim, and therefore I have something or someone or some person to blame, self or someone else, or an environment? Or is this something that I helped co-create, and now I can start to take some charge and empower myself by accepting and owning my relationship with it? And here we are. So now what? Do I need to change some behavior? Could I improve here? Could I improve there? Could I improve how I see things? Could I improve my relationships? Could I improve my self-talk so that I'm not continually recreating this? If I don't feel deserving, then of course I'm going to manifest that exact same thing. Every time something good comes along, a great job opportunity, my ideal person, I find some way to self-sabotage it or self-destruct, which we'll get into self-sabotage down the road. Another episode. But in this case, look at where you can actually take ownership and stop the blame game, the blame, shame, guilt game. Because if you're not blaming someone else, then you don't have to shame them. If I'm not blaming me as a bad person, here you go again, Wade. Here you doing the same thing. You doomus, you stupid son of a gun. And all the great, kind words that follow. Okay, we talk to ourselves much more nasty than we talk to others. It's probably a good idea. Anyway, stop talking to yourself that way. Equally, talk nice and be gracious and compassionate with yourself as you are with others. It doesn't mean being perfect and painting the world with roses. It just means being authentically aware and conscious that language is crucial. That language is important with your own communication with yourself, as depicting self-love, as creating self-love, as nurturing a loving relationship with yourself. As a man, yes, I can say that you need to talk kindly to yourself. We are hard on ourselves for many reasons. All of us are. Be nicer to yourself, and therefore you can be nicer to others. But the bottom line is, where can I take accountability? Where can I improve this process? My self-talk, my communication with others, and then I don't have to blame, guilt, or shame myself. Shame on you for doing this. Shame on you for having this again. See, you're a bad person. See, you always screw this up, and on and on and on that route. And again, that is a vicious path / circle and loop that you create neurologically, and it's just chatter. And then lastly, the guilt part. You feel guilty for having the experience. You feel guilty for how you treat yourself. You feel guilty for having that next experience as a result of that. And this goes on and on and on, again, where you never let go and you never, not necessarily forgive, because at one stage you forgive, but the real gift is when you give it a hug and you benefit and you say, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to have this really painful experience to teach and show me how I'm a part of this equation, how I am part of my own experience. And this is a language that starts to really shift where your experience starts to go and further on. And so if you can, these are the people that will start to take charge. Now this applies to health, which is why we're talking about it. Because every day someone is dealing with, how come these adjustments don't hold? How come my low back continues to hurt? Am I always going to have this? And as I answer those questions, my first thing back to is, what do you think about it? What are your thoughts? Do you think you're going to have to live with this for the rest of your life? They're obviously asking that question, so on some level they do, and they're really concerned. That's the biggest thing, is they're just concerned. I need to know that I don't have to count on this the rest of my life. In my professional opinion, no way am I going to expect, in many of these cases, the majority, that they're not going to have to live with that. Is there a point of damage? Of course there is. Some people can wait too long and have chronic pain and struggle with that for a great period of their life. But what we get at in solving is, where's that coming from? And how do we set the body up to win? And how do we empower our patients to then start choosing, take an active role in it? Because I can't help somebody that doesn't want to be helped or is blaming, shaming, and guilting either on themselves or someone else for their experience and never taking accountability. It just won't work. So that's where this is like where the rubber meets the road. You'll often hear me say is that's where the experience is. In theory, hey, this is great, but how do you apply it? How does it work for you? How can you make it work for you? Give me some actually tools that I can get in there with and make stuff happen, make the dust fly. You know, you just picture this busy little dude, and he's got his tools going, and there's sawdust flying and shrapnel flying here and there, and he's got this product at the end, or this creation he just built or she just built. And this, give me some tools for today. These are tools. Raise your awareness. Raise your awareness to your role in your experience. And I guarantee that if you do, it will be uncomfortable. It will challenge your old belief patterns, but it will set you free if you allow the discomfort, the new discomfort, to teach, to show you, to allow you to have a different experience by taking accountability where you're not used to taking it. One of the old stories I would share is my parents, back when I was in grade school, middle school, we were at a parochial school, but before 7th grade. And I remember, because I had older siblings, whether they were in trouble with the principal or teacher or something was, they had a challenge with a friend, because we were running around our neighborhood playing till dark, and someone would inevitably get hurt and someone did something to someone else and whatever. So there'd be this experience. And I remember the role here, the most important thing was my mom and dad would rarely ever, if never, I've never heard them state to the other parent, whether to a police officer, to a principal, to a teacher, to anyone, our pastor, that it was someone else's fault. They would always take into consideration the first step, which is, I'm sure my son or daughter is capable. I'm sure they're capable of this. Meaning, it wasn't, and I look back and say, was that overly accountable? Was that just over accepting things? And I think it's something missing today. Instead of the parent that's blaming everyone else for what their child's experiencing, instead of actually taking accountability for their child first and letting that lesson be the teacher it is in that experience, rather than trying to avoid and making their child out to be innocent. And none of us are, quote unquote, just innocent. So I say that loosely because you're involved. You're involved, just like actuarial tables in an insurance claim. You are part to blame just because you were there. And the blame is such a strong word with it, but that's their language. I'm saying you're part of that experience as a result of you participating in life. And so instead of looking for thing or someone else to blame or going inward and blaming yourself, let go of blame. Allow blame to dissolve. There's no one to blame. There's nothing to blame. There's this life experience, and the meaning you've given it is blame. The guilt you give it is your meaning. The shame is your shame. It's the shame you were taught to give it. It's the guilt you were taught to give it. It's the blame you were taught to give it. I ask that you raise the awareness for this, for yourself, not for anything else, but so you can expand into the person you're destined to become. And for all the magnitude you have the potential of experiencing in life, the joy, the love, the laughter, the adventure, the excitement, the uncertainty, and the quality. I'd love feedback, comments, any questions. I am floored by all the active participation. I absolutely am grateful for all those who do send in a question and say, can you talk more about this? I love it. Can you talk more about that? Can you elaborate on this point? And those are what drive me in terms of having this communication in this vehicle. So thanks so much for this community, and I appreciate all of you. And for those reviews and comments, I appreciate them greatly. You don't know how much that makes a difference for readers, for viewers. So thank you again for all your kind words and your gracious feedback. Ciao. Thank you much for listening to this week's episode. I look forward to any feedback and or questions you might have. Direct them to our Facebook page, Frankly Speaking, Dr. Wade at Facebook. Okay, my fellow health warriors, it's time to head over to iTunes, franklyspeakingdrwade.com. There, you can rate, review, and subscribe, as well as share, so more of our brothers and sisters can grow to realize their voice. Speaking up means you matter. So, get on it. This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views expressed are not medical advice and are not meant to replace the medical advice of your doctor. This podcast, including Dr. Wade Anderson and his guests, disclaim responsibility for any adverse effects you may experience from the specific use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse and accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about the guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for such services or product. Individuals on this podcast may have direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.